All right, so let's get on with the meat. That is the overview. Now we're going to talk about end of year 3, and we're going to begin with behavioral incidents. All right, so why do we submit behavioral incidents? Why is this a key data element in CalPADS, right? So we need to be accountable to the requirements of the Every Student Succeeds Act. We have to provide information on expulsions, suspensions, and persistently dangerous schools. Those are schools that have a high number of violent offenses. We have to be accountable to the requirements of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, provide from end of year 3, students and expulsion counts related to information about students with disabilities. I just recently learned from Brandy that these reports also can help your student with disabilities or your SPED coordinators identify disproportionality. Then you have AB 2657, where we had to provide information, the use of restraints and seclusions for all students. And then you have your also part of accountability is the efforts to be transparent, right? And so we have the dashboard and DataQuest public facing reports. And from end of year 3, chronic absenteeism, a state indicator is derived, as well as part of the suspension rate, the cumulative enrollment, and the incident that result in suspensions will generate the suspension rate. So all of end of year has the same reporting period, the entire academic year from July 1st to June 30th. So any students RFEP, any students in a behavioral incident, any students enrolled, any students, what are the other data collections? That's pretty much any students identified as homeless will show up on your counts for the various reports. For incidents, particularly, we want incidents for any students, right? Primary, secondary, or short term. Grade levels KN through 12. You want to report all incidents from all school sites, including NPS schools. Remember that funds, the public funds are used to pay those NPS schools, and so the requirements are the same. Those students at NPS schools are treated like public school students, and we have the requirement of gathering the information on those students. When you're thinking about incident reporting, what guides us is Education Code 48900 and 48915. 48900, when you read it, it really identifies the offenses that a student can commit that are suspendable. And then 48915 shows you the authorizations for expelling a student. So you really shouldn't be reporting incidences that are not defined in those ed code. Not that you have to suspend or expel the student, right? Because there's other means of correction. Sometimes you might not choose to administer the discipline, but those violations are required. So every incident should have an offense attached to it, unless it's an instance of restraint and seclusion. Those should be reported even if it was not a result of a violation of 48900 and 48915. So an example of this would be Matt is kind of like the new student at school, and he's missing his friends, and he's just crying uncontrollably, and that's disrupting Tyron and Marshall from doing their work, right? That removal could be an incident of seclusion, right? There's a greater definition for what seclusion is. We'll cover that later. But just to paint the picture, right? Sometimes seclusion could be to protect the student from themselves and others. It may not be a violation. Report all results for each incident, right? So again, me and Marshall get into a fight. I get an in-school suspension and an out-of-school suspension. Those are two different results. Report any increment of day for suspensions for all students. So, Kyron is slick with his mouth. Teacher feels he's disrespectful, suspends him for half a day. He comes back the next day. you still report that suspension as part of an incident, and it would be 0.5, half a day. If it was a 3-day suspension, you report all 3 days. That's the duration. And the duration is required for all suspensions and expulsions. It's not required for the other incidents. All right, reminder of the Defiance Law. So Education Student Offense Code 511 and CalPADS is mapped to disruption and defiance in Ed Code. And so for several years, we've been mentioning that for K through 8 students, it's basically illegal to suspend students solely for defiance or disruption, right? You get a warning because you may have actually done this. We can't prevent you from doing this, but what we want to do is alert you that it's inappropriate because it's been defined in Ed Code. That means it's illegal. And if you have this, you can identify it in the report to make changes going forward. The one exception is 48.910, and that defines what a teacher suspension is. Teacher, in 48.910, it says a teacher may suspend any pupil from class for any acts in 48.900 for the day of the suspension and the day following. So, an elementary school teacher effectively suspending a student from their class might look like a regular suspension, right? I mean, the principal could put the student in another classroom or some room, but they can also send that student home because they have nowhere to go. The teacher is suspending them from their class. And environment where there's multiple teachers or students taking multiple classes, teacher may suspend a student from their, might be a student's third period. And for 2 days, that day and the next day, that student can't go to third period. That student's allowed to go to the other classes, but the teacher suspension is restricting that student from their classroom. And so in that Ed Code, disruption of defiance, you can suspend that. The teacher, not the school, the teacher can suspend that student. So that's something to note, and that's something you want to make sure that you document locally, because in CalPADS, we do not have a specific code for teacher suspension. It looks like any other suspension. Perhaps the only indication would be the duration, right? Because if it's students at teacher suspension, it's probably not a full day. It's probably a fraction of the day. Students have 6 periods. That's probably whatever 1 out of 6 is, 18% or something like that, 0.18, whatever it is. If a student has 5 periods, it's 0.2. So however it's reported. Just keep that in mind because it will trigger an error and you could be subject to monitoring if you have suspensions related to solely disruption and defiance. And then coming back to NPS expectations, of course, you are reporting CalPADS. NPS schools report no information to CalPADS. They have no logins, no nothing. And so the onus is on you. The onus is on your staff to collect this information from the NPS schools. So one thing to keep in mind is that your SEDS data coordinators, your special education staff usually has some kind of relationship with the NPS schools. So the first place you may want to check is with your SEDS data coordinator to see if you have any discipline incidents in your special education systems. If you do, you need to get that information over to your student information system so that it can be reported to CalPADS. No discipline information comes from the special education system. If not, you or your SEDS data coordinator needs to contact the NPS schools to collect this information. First, verify if there's been any incidents of discipline or restraint or seclusion. If so, you need that information from them because you have to put that incident into your SIS. If you have multiple NPS schools, get the information from all the schools because you remember your NPS schools have the same number for school of attendance. So those 3 files used to submit incidents are full replacement. So it would be in your best interest to submit all that data at once. And if you need some instruction on how to do this, we have training. So going back to the resources, you go down student discipline, NPS reporting presentation, video transcript, NPS student incident guide. This is an Excel document where we collected pertinent information for student discipline and consolidated so that if you needed to send this to your NPS schools about what CalPads need, this would help. This is the PowerPoint for training. When we talked to the NPS schools, I joined Brandy and Shiloh. They did most of the talking. Shiloh's from, the head of the CDE department, special education department at CDE. Brandy's over there now. She's a CalPads guru, still even in her new role. So this is something to share with them or familiarize yourself with. And then the video, Marshall's included here in end of year data populations, NPS student discipline. So while you may want to watch incident data population, you can always send this to your NPS schools if they act like they don't know CalPads or I don't know what you need from me, right? Hey, please watch this video. It makes all our lives easier. Or you can strong arm the information from them. That's my tactic. All right, so incident. What is an incident? Event resulting in the use of physical restraint, mechanical restraint, or seclusion, or statutory offense. Each incident may have multiple students involved. Each student may commit multiple offenses during a single incident. So we point out what an incident is. We try to define it because the reports related to incidents are focused on the incident. It seems that most of us are more focused on the offense and the result. But in terms of reporting, incident guides those reports. And you'll see that on the second half of today's training. Incident results, the outcome or results of the incident. Again, that could be discipline or it can be a restraint or seclusion, right? And we don't think of restraint or seclusion as discipline, right? Those are behavioral incidents, but the result could be the outcome. So is other means of correction discipline? Is no discipline? So it's synonymous with discipline, but there are also outcomes outside of that. Those are your results. The statutory offense, those are the codes that are mapped to student violations outlined in sections 48,900 and 48,915. Seclusion is the involuntary confinement of a pupil alone in a room or area which the pupil is physically prevented from leaving. So, we should not be indicating in our information systems seclusion or restraint. That information should be populated for us by the disciplinary authority. So unless you're the disciplinary authority, you don't have to worry about the definition per se, but it's something that probably doesn't happen frequently, so you want to make sure that if it seems an abnormal number of seclusions or restraints, that you make sure that they understood what it is, right? You can't say that you had an incident of seclusion if a student just had to go outside the classroom for 5 minutes to calm down. Maybe there were a passionate argument between students and one student had to step outside, right? Wouldn't be seclusion. So you understanding the definition and looking at the reports may help make corrections in the future. Same with behavioral restraint, right? Mechanical restraint is the use of device or equipment to restrict a pupil's freedom from movement. And a physical restraint is a personal restriction to immobilize or reduce the student's ability to move their body, right? Several different body parts listed. And then student incident submission. So how does this data get into CalPads? A collection of files. First, there has to be an enrollment file or enrollment record for the school that is submitting the result, really, right? So the example I like to use, and it may not be relevant to you all, but there's always questions, right? If the student is on the bus or the student goes to a different high school and gets in a fight, how do I report the incident? Well, we don't have incident location, right? We have incident date. That's part of the sync file. And then where's the student getting the result from? If the student is suspended, they're suspended from the school they attend, not necessarily the location in which they got in the fight, right? So it's pretty straightforward. If you look at the CalPads CFS and you just populate the fields, these theoretical questions don't necessarily come to mind. That's one that's been asked before. So first you have to have an enrollment record at the school of attendance. If it's summer school and you don't report summer school typically in CalPads, right? We instruct you not to. If there's an incident, you do report it. The reference for this is the CalPads data guide. So if you can't remember what I'm saying, remember that you look in CalPads data guide. And if you do a control find for summer school, you'll see the instructions. But basically, students get in a fight in summer school, you report it. You enroll the student with a secondary enrollment. That way, a status record isn't required. The other file types for the student aren't required. And so the student has a secondary enrollment at the summer school. You report the incident like any other incident. Then you close that enrollment. It doesn't have to stay open. You can be a single day enrollment the day of the incident. That gives you the ownership to report to student. So you have the SENR record. In the sync, the SIRS, and the SOF, right? You need to report that incident and provide an incident ID. The incident ID will match to the SIRS record. Now you have the incident and the result, the outcome. Those are strictly required. If you have one, you have to have the other. The SOF record is the offense. And as you know, not every incident has an offense, right? So if it's restraint or seclusion, you may not have an offense, right? Kyron's outburst because he didn't get his Twinkie didn't hurt anybody. We didn't suspend Kyron. He just was uncontrollable for a period of time. And but if there is an offense outlined in Education Code 48900, 48915, you have to tell us, right? Because you can't have a lot of kids suspended for no reason, right? That's why Ed Code defines what is, a suspendable offense, because I might have been a mischievous student. You couldn't be suspending me just for making kids laugh all the time.